This program is brought to you by Emory University.
So my name is Peter Roberts. I'm the Associate Professor and Associate Professor of Organization and Management here in the Business School. On behalf of all the faculty and staffs and students who stand behind the creation of what we hope to call social enterprise at Goizueta, let me welcome you all to today's talk. I'm just going to spend just a couple of minutes in front of you because I know exactly why you're here and it has very little to do with listening to me. So I don't want to stand in between you and the speaker, but I do want to start things off just on behalf of social enterprise at Goizueta by just saying, wow, great and gratifying to see such an amazing turnout for what is actually just the first such speaker, first of our social enterprise speakers. Now I know this isn't due, I would say in large part, but it might even be in full part, to the level of interest kind of around Emory and around Atlanta in the kind of things that Dr. Sandor does and the kind of work that he does. And so I know that's part of it. I'm also hoping that our general interest in this space relates to how interested we are as a business school in how business acumen, creative market activity, right, can play a role in addressing some of society's greatest challenges. And I'm going to say there can be no doubt, but I guess we'll morph that and sort of say there should be no doubt, right, that Dr. Sandor and his Chicago Climate Exchange have chosen to confront a very important challenge. And I'm not going to give plugs to a particular book, but I just happened to be reading on the way to work today, and something that sort of, I think, kind of sets the tone. Although science rarely provides absolute certainty, a consensus has emerged among scientists and among a small but growing cadre of influential leaders that the changes needed to avert extreme and possibly uncontrollable climate change will be greater and must happen far more quickly than we imagined even a few years ago. Right? There's no question that there are debates, but the author goes on to say sooner or later it actually comes time to making choices, not simply waiting for more evidence or simply waiting for more debate. And there could be no doubt, I said that already. And Dr. Sandor, sorry. Dr. Sandor is clearly not waiting. Rather, he's chosen to act in a way that influences the context in which other major economic actors are making decisions that affect every one of us and that affect the planet upon which we reside. He did this by founding the Chicago Climate Exchange, the world's first and North America's only voluntary, legally binding greenhouse gas emissions cap and trade system. As testimony to why we should be all here listening, numerous awards and accolades to his impacts and accomplishments. If I was to list them all, I'd probably take up all your time. But I will just note the one that kind of stuck out for me. Honored in 2007 in one of Time Magazine's Heroes of the Environment for his work as the father of carbon trading. So ladies and gentlemen, I am very pleased that we get to spend the next hour listening to Dr. Richard Sandor.
Thanks, Peter. This is the third talk that I've given, I guess, in the last 30 hours. But Peter, it's the most exciting talk that I could give. I love being around universities. I've been teaching on and off since 1963. And I can't tell you how exciting it is. And I can't believe the turnout on a warm, lovely afternoon. So I apologize for any ineptitude I might show in the next hour, and I'll try to share with you some fun things. I want to kind of start with an overview and to give you a breadth of what we're speaking about today. And that is value creation as the central hypothesis. And if we take a look at society and what's happened, particularly the American model over the last 55, 60 years, and we break it into silos of time, if we take a look at 1945 to 70, wealth and value creation was in manufacturing. The world was obliterated. 68% of the world's GDP was the United States. Hard to believe today, but the expression used to go, how goes General Motors, that's how America goes, for those of you who don't remember that. And that was the bellwether. But value was created generally in the context of manufacturing. If we fast forward to the next bucket, the decade of the 70s, it was commodities that really created wealth. 2 Arab oil embargoes, 73 and 79. In 73, the Russian crop failed, the Chinese crop failed. We had a late spring, couldn't get soybeans and corn in. We had an early frost, couldn't get them out. The anchovies stopped running off the coast of Peru. You couldn't feed the animals, and basically you were off with commodity inflation. The wealth proposition was in trading and trading firms, in grain merchandising and oil trading, etc. Phillips Brothers, which was an oil trading firm, bought Solomon Brothers, the biggest bond house. Ultimately, the management at Solomon were capable of winning back control of the firm, but it was commodities, and it was Bunge and Cargill and Continental Grain and Coke, and these are where value propositions were. Gold at $800 an ounce, silver at $50 an ounce, etc. If we go to the decade of the 80s, we have another value proposition. It's in commodities, but a very different kind of commodity. It is in the commoditization of financial instruments. Interest rates become a commodity through financial futures. The whole field of asset liability management is born. Banks can now adjust their liabilities and their assets and run a matchbook or not run a matchbook, that is, borrow and lend for the same time period. And those that survived those tumultuous interest rate levels mastered interest rate risk management. While it's not comfortable in today's terms to talk about things like mortgages, we have to remember they were born in that era, and maybe we don't like it, but 63, 64% of the home ownership, which we're at now, 63, 64 of the economy, has been due to the fact that we've been able to securitize mortgages. When I was involved in the financial futures business, California, a brief time ago in my terms, but 30 years in your terms a long time, but a mere 30 years ago, interest rates in California had to be 100 basis points over those in the Northeast, so capital will flow from where housing was fully developed to the developing areas. People who originated mortgages in the West Coast had to sell them to East Coast savings banks. And they had to do it loan by loan. You know, they went down there, went to Tempe, got drunk, and did deals on FHA and VA loans. And they looked at them, they underwrote them, and did all of this. The invention of Ginnie Mae's changed that entire concept. And capital was able to flow. The bid-ask spread at that time on Ginnie Mae's was 98 bid at 100, okay, $2 full. It's half a 32nd today. So the transactions costs, okay, were reduced to hundreds of dollars from tens of thousands of dollars by securitization. What else happened in the commodity space? There was something called bank debt that was ultimately turned into a commodity. It got called junk bonds. But that securitization of bank credit created an enormous amount of wealth. In this town alone, there was a guy, you know, here in the early 80s, he thought that he could start a planetary network. Then you could actually broadcast overseas. Couldn't get bank financing, went to the junk bond market, borrowed billions of dollars. Another guy who had a crazy idea was Terry McGaugh, and he had an idea about cell phones. Couldn't get access to capital markets, did it through the commoditization of financial instruments, and built that company. Bill McGowan, guy had the temerity to take on AT&T, which was a monopoly, and basically started a second phone company. This was outrageous. Couldn't get the capital from the establishment, ended up with the help of commoditization getting access to it. Fast forward to the 90s, Cisco went public in 1990, not that long ago. That enabled the internet, which enabled Google, Facebook, Twittering, YouTube, you name it all. And that was, in fact, the commoditization of data and information. It could be distributed easily and cheaply, and access became no problem, and distribution became no problem. So what's next? And I want to put forth the hypothesis that the next great value proposition for all of you, okay, in your lifetime, will be the commoditization of air and water. It will have left from financial instruments and commodities in the 70s to a vast degree of commoditization over the last 30 years in air and water. Why air and water? Who here seriously believes that you can live, or the marginal value of water should be lower than soybeans or corn or a hamburger or clean air, and the access to it should be good? Economists generally look at the problem and have said, we live in a public environment, and in that public environment, there's no scarcity, okay? That in effect, these are free goods. Well, that may have been true when Adam Smith started writing. It's certainly not true right now with 7 billion people on the planet and on the way to 9 billion. So what do? You've got to do some financial engineering, and you need to invent and find some way to take the air in this room and chop it up so each of us owns a piece of it. Otherwise, it's going to be the standard Great American Barbecue. Everybody step up, it's free, and suck up all the food and all of the that you can drink, because this is America and it's free. And when it's free, you overeat, you overdrink, there's no price and no rationing. So what do you do in a case like that? Well, you invent some surrogate for trading. In this case, the idea came from an economist by the name of Ronald Coase, who wrote an article in 1960 called The Theory of Social Costs. One way to stop it is to give everybody here a quota. Say, Peter, you get, 3 gallons a day, and if you don't use the 3 gallons, you can sell it to somebody else. If you only use 2, or if you want 4 because you need to drink more or like to drink more, then you buy it from somebody else. And Ronald Coase argued at that time that this, quote, bargain, by bargain we mean a trade, that bargaining was superior than just simply saying, command and control, this is what you do. You can't trade, you just get your 3 gallons. If you don't use it, fine. If you do, you spill it out. It doesn't matter, but it has no efficiency driver to it. That was subsequently ratified by a guy by the name of J.P. Dales at Toronto, and he put it into something called cap and trade. And that's enabled where we are today. I want to digress for 1 minute because I think it's really interesting. If we take a look at inventive activity, and I was strolling down the hall, Peter, and I took a look at 2 articles, one, Technological Innovation and Radical Change by Sudhin Tell, and then another article by Professor Japp on reverse auctions, okay? Almost all of the activity that we study is aimed at industrial inventive activity, not financial activity. Just think, why is that? And the question was one I posed to Kenneth Arrow and asked him about, in which he responded in the 70s by giving a talk at a Commodities conference that I had the privilege of hosting. And he began the conference by saying, who here in this audience would argue that double entry bookkeeping is any less important than the steam engine? Okay, that in fact, financial inventive activity is very, very difficult to have, and what sets countries back like Japan and maybe China is they don't have well-developed financial systems. I know it's not popular, toxic derivatives, it's a time of change. All of these, folks in the capital markets have brought the country under. But that's abuses that could have been and should have been regulated away. It is not the instrument itself. It is the bad application and inept regulation that got us where we are. Why don't we study or learn about the guy who invented double-entry bookkeeping back in Renaissance Italy in the 13th century? Number one, okay, I'm going to give you a couple of hypotheses. Number one is that these things are generally not patentable, okay? And as long as we had the patent system grow up under the Magna Carta, you couldn't patent it, so you couldn't put a name with an idea. The second thing is they're wholesale products. How many people heard of Ginnie Mae's before you went to graduate school? How many of you have heard of instant cameras like Polaroid and whatnot? Okay, a great many. The value of Polaroid compared to a mortgage-backed security is so ridiculous, okay, and the proportion is so large, we can't even think about it. So it tends to be, number one, not patentable. Often it tends to be collaborative. And three, it's a wholesale, not a retail product. So those of you that are working in finance recognize that there's an enormous value proposition by financial inventive activity. Even the two authors here, I think, did great fun work, and they were talking about technological innovation, but it was all in the context of industrial. Nobody's talked about all of these financial instruments that's been, and in fact, the reverse auction that Sud was talking about, or Jap was talking about, had to do with industrial activity. In fact, the whole B2B framework, the value proposition has been in exchanges becoming electronic, far more than the industrial value. If you take a look at just in the United States and here in town, you have basically one of the products, ICE, the Intercontinental Exchange, the Chicago Merck Group, and between the two of them, you've got $35 billion in market cap. How many of the B2B supply chain companies have burned and died versus the electronic exchanges around the world? I want to tell you that coming here is a privilege, and I mention ICE because if I could sing and dance, I'd sing Georgia on my mind. And I've got a lot of special reasons to thank Peter and the Dean for being here. And number one, on a note of financial inventive activity, in 1973, I was a young economist and at the Chicago Board of Trade, and somebody came knocking at my door late in the day, a young guy that nobody else wanted to see. And he was there investigating the high food prices for then head of the Senate Ag Committee, a man by the name of Herman Talmadge. And the guy's name was Mike McLeod, and nobody wanted to see Mike. And so as a 30-year-old, I was given the job of hosting him and taking good care of him and hopefully basically smoothing relationships. Well, that grew, and funny enough, Herman Talmadge ended up being the co-author to the creation of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. And as a result of Herman and some folks over in the House, he changed the definition of commodities upon some assistance from us to include anything for future delivery, tangible or intangible. And that intangibility created interest rate futures, stock index futures, options, all of those, so it's a Georgian product. So, and my family wants to thank you all. And another reason is my grandkids are here, and so that's another reason to be thankful for Georgia. And it does play a part. And if you really got bound to the history, you'd say a head of the Senate Agricultural Committee changed the world capital markets. But that's the true story. It was a slip of one word and the notion of conceptually, not a physical commodity, but a financial instrument that could be traded. And prior to that time, you couldn't do it because the SEC had jurisdiction. One other thing that Senator Talmadge did, put in another word, and it was exclusive, that the Commodity Futures Trading Commission would have exclusive jurisdiction over anything that's traded for future delivery, even if it was a security. So just by putting intangible and exclusive, you change the nature of financial inventive activity in the United States for banks, for portfolio managers, for all of those folks. And those kinds of things do go unrecorded, but they are very, very interesting. And you can talk about step functions, which the papers do, about radical technological change, or you can talk about S-curves and all of those things. But the fact is, they occur by collaborative efforts within the private sector, interaction with public sector activity, until you hone into an earth-shattering change that goes with the step function, but there's a lot of drama underneath it. We're kind of saying, well, that's a big prelude into what is cap and trade, which is the subject that I'm supposed to speak about. And cap and trade is a financial invention. Okay, I don't claim authorship for it. Okay, it is Professor Coase, and ultimately, but I am a student of his, and he's inspired me. He's 99 and a half years old. I had lunch with him on Saturday, and he told me he was doing his most important work, and he is trying to redefine economics based on the Chinese miracle. So at 99 and a half years old, he's still writing and working, and he believes we're going the reverse way, that we should be importing Chinese economists, not exporting US economists, because the Chinese miracle may in fact redefine economics and what it is. Professor Coase's notion was put a cap on, okay, limit the amount of emissions, and then allow bargains to take place. But the fundamental driver is the cap. The trading is just a way to get to low-cost transition to a lower carbon economy. People focus on the value of trading, the volume of trading, in this billion and that billion and this trillion. That's not the key. The key is to reduce emissions, okay, and do it in a cost-effective way, not to drive unemployment, and to provide a venue for a transition to a low pollution-free world, whether it's air or water. The most significant example of that, and I don't know how I use this, Peter, but I'll see how I advance it, and the widespread application of, we don't need it, or just, next one, you go. There you go. The first widespread application, that's the only slide you're going to see, just because it glows and it's got hot spots, as they say in the EPA. I promise you no more slides. If you take a look at in 1989, I got some people, and they said, you know, you helped in commoditize interest rates, you think you can commoditize the air. And being an ultimate optimist, I said, yeah, not knowing of what I spoke. Other than some prodding from a friend of mine from graduate school who had been bothering me for 20 years that I should focus some of my skills in the environmental space. An economist who did one of the first PhDs in basically ducks and reserves and wildlife preservation and things like that. And the issue was the United States had been the victim of acid rain for decades. Michael Douglas made a movie called Black Rain. It was all over the popular press. We're going to be deforested, black things all over the things, rivers acidified. Nothing could stop this inexorable march to environmental distinction. And they were going to put in, oddly enough at that time, a cap and trade program, not simply mandate to power companies that they had to reduce SO2 emissions, but actually a trading program. We advocated for that act. Very interesting because it has its parallels potentially in climate change and other people, other venues that may not have the benefit of the SO2 experience in their history notebook. In 1990, we emitted 18 million tons. That was the baseline. The goal was to cut it by 50%, okay, in 20 years. Think carbon as I'm making this argument, okay? Everybody said, can't do it. Technologically, there's no way that you can achieve. We rely on coal. That's the only possible thing. When you burn coal, you get sulfur. You can't do it physically. Number two, even if you could do it physically, you would basically push power prices so high that you damage the economy and ruin our ability to export with people who didn't have acid rain laws, like developing countries. So that's the second thing. The third thing is, even if you got to the point where you could implement and power prices weren't that high, it would be technologically lead you to a dead end, that you would basically destroy any creativity and destroy anything that had to do with power generation. Fast forward 2010. Emissions of SO2 this year are going to be 9 million tons. Okay? If you take a look at real electricity prices today, or even from 2007, at the height of the economic boom, they're below where they were in 1990. Number three, we have a $14 trillion economy, and this program, by the EPA's reckoning, is $1 billion to $2 billion cost a year. And if you go to the EPA's website, you will see that they forecast this year the annual benefits from reduced medical expenses on lung disease will be $123 billion. That's a good trade in the business that I'm in, okay? You invest $1 billion. Now, that doesn't include deacidification of rivers. It doesn't include recreational value of forests, and doesn't include whatever diseases that are caused by SO2 that we don't even know about, right? So we're talking about 123 to 1 or 60 to 1 cost-benefit ratio. Well, this is amusing and good cocktail kind of chatter, but what does this have to do with who I am and why I'm here and the Chicago Climate Exchange? The Chicago Climate Exchange was the founding exchange in a family of exchanges that deal with externalities, air and water, okay? And so we're a new niche business that began, and we implement federal, regional, or international agreements when there is an international agreement. When there is not any agreement, we build a voluntary market and act like a central government, okay? We administer, we monitor, we verify, we provide a matching engine, we register pollution, and we do all of the functions that would traditionally be performed by a sovereign entity. In 1999, a woman who I had met in the 90s approached me, and she was heading a foundation in Chicago and said, you know, we've known each other since the UN years, and you've been advocating starting a market, and you're talking about really implementing, not just theorizing it about it. And you've had a track record. Can we give you some money? And I said, that was an easy one. Yeah. How much was the next question? And she said, submit we'll put out an RFP, or don't even put out an RFP. It's the Millennium, and we'll give you a special Millennium Grant. So she gave us $400,000 to explore a carbon market. The goal and objective at that time was very, very simple. It was to prove concept, to build institutional capabilities, to go and work with people at universities, in the legal profession and accounting, to build human capital so that when we implemented Kyoto, we would have a head start with the rest of the world. Okay, this was the objective. So we took the money, we spent $400,000, and we got Price Waterhouse in, and then we got some law firms, and then said, can we give out these quotas? And if people don't live by them, can we enforce them under commercial contract? What can we do to implement the program? And then we burned through the $400,000 and got to the $800,000 second grant, and brought in 30 companies, and over a consensus period, built a set of objectives for 30 firms. And they were divided into industrial, forest products, power, and agriculture. Each one had a reduction target in mind. Each one had a baseline year. Each one was debating whether it should be sectoral or across sectors. Should the same reduction targets apply? What were the differences? And we came up with something called the Chicago Accord, which is about a 25-page document. I'm looking around, but I'll find it later. Just to give you an idea about the clarity and simplicity, we did in less than 30 pages. Most bills today, like the health care, the environmental bill, are roughly north of 2,000. Okay, and we put down all of the premises. From the moment we got the money, okay, to when we wrote that Chicago Accord, everything that could have gone wrong went wrong. Okay, I don't mean something, but I mean every single thing that you can imagine. First thing right out of the box, the president pulled out of Kyoto, and everybody said, it's all over, you're dead. Nobody's going to join an exchange voluntarily. Number one, they're not going to do it anyway, but now they're surely not going to do it because there's no legislative imperative anywhere near the horizon. So that's it. That was followed by 9/11, the Afghan war, the stock market crashing, the dot-com bubble bursting, Enron imploding and selling energy trading, a deep recession, and a war in Iraq. So that was kind of the circumstances that we began. We went through the $1.2 million. We got friends and families, and then all of a sudden, on a near-death spell, we got our first outside investor. The Jesuits of California, $1.6 million. Now, a lot of you folks, I'm sure, have worked before or whatnot. I've been at this for 35 years. I've never had a conversation with an investor that mimicked my conversations with Father Francis. My secretary would come in Maryland on a hush basis and say, Father Francis is on the phone, Richard. And I would pick up the telephone, and I'd say, hello, Father. And he would say, how are you, Richard? I'd say, fine, Father. And then he would ask me a question that you never want to hear from a man of God. Richard, how's your burn rate? I said, Father, it's not good. We're burning a lot of money. Then he would say to me, Richard, Are you recruiting any members? Natalie, it's a very hard job. I'd say, no, Father, it's very difficult. He'd say, any prospective legislation, Richard? And I would say, no, Father. And then he'd end the conversation in a way that I've never heard any investor on Wall Street or LaSalle Street or Montgomery Street say. And he would end with, always, I pray for you every night, Richard. Anyway, we went public in 2003. I'm not sure where, but I think Father Francis got out in somewhere around 10 pounds, so he got 1,000%. I was happy because it was important that his client do well. I didn't want him to disappoint his client. And so it turned out to be a happy ending. CCX grew. We established an exchange in Europe to implement the European Union's emissions trading system. That exchange last year traded notionally 100 billion of European carbon. We developed a mandatory implemented mandatory programs at the federal and at the regional level with SO2 and NOx. We also trade renewable energy certificates, and we will do that in the future. All of the mandated programs, including the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which is a cap-and-trade carbon program in the Northeast. To put it in perspective, the European Climate Exchange has 750,000 contracts open, each one for 1,000 tons. We traded 100 billion notionally, and that's bigger than soybeans, just to put it in perspective in terms of open interest. The small regional program in the Northeast basically is 188 million tons of carbon emissions out of 7.5 billion in the US, so it's trivial. And that trades now more actively than pork bellies and milk and other well-known commodities. So we are already seeing carbon and markets. It's not tomorrow's, it's yesterday's or today's. It is your future, and it is happening as we speak. We also have in addition to Reggie, we've got other initiatives around the world, and let me speak a little bit about what we're doing geographically, and then question and answers are always fun, and I'll try to spend as much time as I can on that. We've established exchanges in Canada in a joint venture with the Toronto Stock Exchange, in Australia with Macquarie Bank, and most interestingly enough, in China. We have a partnership with the China National Petroleum Corporation, which on any given day now has a market capitalization bigger than Exxon. It has 1.8 million employees full-time and 1.6 million full-time contractors. Okay? They are the biggest oil company, and they have become our partners to develop market-based solutions to environmental issues. We also have a joint venture with the Central Bank of China. And the Central Bank of China has formed with us the U.S.-China Low Carbon Finance Research Center with offices in Beijing and in Chicago. The purpose is to educate companies in least cost solutions to environmental caps, how you deal with this thing. We're also talking to India. So all of you who read the popular press, I would look at it scantily. This year, Pew Center just published a report. The investment in renewables in China was $34 billion. The U.S. total was $18 billion. They're almost twice. The third nation is the UK with $11 billion. They are the largest photovoltaic sector in the world. And it looks like, and I don't like to quote the New York Times, but reportedly, or any newspaper without looking at the original research, purportedly they just became the largest producers of wind. I can tell you that I saw an investor of ours when I was in Hong Kong about 3 weeks ago, and their estimate is that 40% of the GDP of China in 2020, 2030 framework, 40% will be in renewable energy, $2.3 trillion of their GDP. So lest we think that the Chinas and Indias of the world aren't on target, they move and move quickly, and they implement quickly. And I will give you an example. I'm on the board of American Electric Power. We built a 90-mile transmission line from Virginia to West Virginia. It took us 14 years to do that. 13 years of permits and 1 year to build. Okay, to go 90 miles. My partners in China just bought up oil fields in the Turkic republics, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, etc., and they built a 1,600-kilometer pipeline from natural gas in Central Asia throughout China, and they did it in 11 months. Okay, you can produce power in Arkansas at 4 cents a kilowatt hour. You can't sell it in Texas because Texas' electricity grid is closed. It's the Lone Star State, and you actually cannot import or export electricity into Texas, even though it's 4 times the size. So we have a lot of things to overcome in this country. I think we can, and we're optimistic. Let me kind of tell you about the last thing we're doing, and then we'll throw it up to questions. Number one is we are studying water trading. 1 grant from New Mexico. I'm off to Calgary on Sunday. Alberta will run out of water before they run out of tar sands. Okay, just to put it in perspective. And we're doing a study for them, and we have a partnership with the state of Pennsylvania. What happens there, and talk about externalities, you get all these wastewater treatment plants, and you got farmers who apply nitrogen very heavily, and the nitrogen overflows, it gets into the Chesapeake Basin and destroys all the crabs. Can't get soft-shell crabs, they're dying, and everything else. So we're going to start nutrient trading, where in fact the farmers, for not heavily applying nitrogen, can get credits, and they can deal with the wastewater treatments, and hopefully we're going to extend it because fishermen are natural buyers of these credits because they don't want contamination. There's a trade here in water quality and water quantity. You guys are the best and brightest, okay? You really are. This is a fantastic university. You're among the 20 top schools. From what I understand, you have a very nurturing environment. Look at this, whether it's the technologies in renewable energy, okay, or whether it's the financial aspects of this, there is a life-giving career for you. You can do good and you can do well, okay? They're not incompatible. As a matter of fact, they're very compatible in today's world. Look at these areas, whether it's the industrial or whether it's the financial. We need you in the business. I've done this for 35 years. I've invoked people about financial futures, about acid rain, and I want to convoke all of you to look at this field seriously, because if we get the human capital out of the universities, if we get the Peter Roberts studying this stuff and taking a leadership role, we could change this and make it a better world for me, for my kids, for my grandkids. But it has to be uniformly believed in. Remember Sheikh Yamani's words, and he was asked the question about when they would run out of oil. And he reminded the audience that the Stone Age ended not because they ran out of stones, okay? The fossil fuel era will end when there's oil in the ground. It's not going to be when there is no oil. It's going to be when oil is still there. Thank you for the opportunity, Peter, and thank you all very much for the summer day.
We have time in the room here for maybe 10 minutes worth of questions, and then we'll move to a different venue.
Yes, sir.
I'm George.
Hiya, George.
I'm an MBA student. My question is about futures and future. If Copenhagen doesn't work out, or the substitute of Copenhagen, it seems it's not going well, is the Chicago Climate Exchange prepared to start trading in futures based on the commitments of international, foreign aid from the rich world to the disappearing islands in the Pacific and Bangladesh and all those?
Let me kind of tell you two things, okay? The answer to the first question, our business doesn't depend upon international agreements per se. I believe that emissions trading will not be top-down, it will be bottom-up. And I believe that it will be like cotton was in the 19th century there was a center in Mumbai, in Winterthur, Switzerland, in Alexandria, in Liverpool, in New Orleans, and then arbitrage linked them all, and they had some common features, but they didn't have a lot. So I believe there will be 6 markets that will be nationally driven. One will be in Europe, the other will be in North America, one possibly in Japan because there's a approach avoidance to trading there, one in China, one in India, potentially one in Brazil and Russia. And they will be linked by offsets, okay? And offsets are those things that sequester carbon, like trees, or soil management processes, or rangeland management, or animal methane, number one. Number two, I want to tell you about a fantastic prospect. We get criticized because the price of carbon is very low and it says it doesn't change behavior. All well and good. It's $2, it's down to a dime because there's political uncertainty, business is tough, but I want to tell you about a little project that we have because you talk about flow of funds. We teamed up with a not-for-profit, an NGO in Kerala, India. Kerala is the poorest province in India. It's less than $1 a day. And what we did was very, very, very simple. We went to the towns and we went to the villages with this NGO. And we said, here's the issue here. You really can solve global warming. Well, how can we do that? But more importantly, you can make money, and you're poor. And they said, what's the prescriptive tool? And we said, very, very simple. And the prescriptive tool is the following. You basically go and you have your 7-year-old girls gathering wood, and you're burning that inside for cooking, okay? Number one, you deprive all of the girls educational possibilities, and 2, you cause enormous lung things. And right now, you're sitting, in which it's generous because cows are sacred, manure all over the place. So why don't you get garbage pans, essentially. We call them miniature anaerobic manure digesters, but you just throw the, in there, and you leave about this amount of space. And the methane seeps out. You take a copper tube and you run it into the house. The girls don't have to go and fetch wood. And you get rid of all the lung problems from burning wood indoors. We started with 7,000 families in one province. We got up to 15. I don't know, Natalie, were we up to 100 or 200,000? I think we got a couple of 100,000 families. We gave $20, $25 a year. That materially changes their life, and you're changing the whole culture. And that's with a voluntary carbon market. And a friend of mine who recently was under attack by the name of Rajendra Pachauri, who was the head of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Exchange. And some people took after him. He's been totally exonerated, I might say. But he and this NGO said to us, you know, you are, unlike the big consulting firms and the big law firms, you're actually bringing money into India and promoting rural development. Markets can do that, and even a simple voluntary one like ours with the low price of carbon can affect 100,000 lives. I would tell you, if we didn't have the political uncertainty, I was pushing my team to get 1 million families. And when we turn up in these villages, we give them a big paper check. They come out with garlands of flowers and CCX checks, and you can actually deposit CCX carbon and use it in a credit card in those 4 provinces. It has become a currency for those people. We are only limited by our imagination. Yours, all of you at this stage in life, are unbounded by experience, which is fabulous, okay? There's nothing better than a blank slate and an open mind. I think we've got, I don't know, Natalie, how many people under 30 now or under 35? Most of you. I come in a room and I think that the average age, aside from me, who's from the Tyrannosaurus Rex, most of the people are under 30. And most of them started with no experience. And there are people like Eric Taub, who were aggregators here, who didn't have experience in the business. Natalie, out of a master's program at the University of Chicago. I'm telling you, there's pearls out there. And bend over to pick them up. They're really out there. Yes?
Hi there, I'm Margaret. Follow-up question to your involvement in India. How close do you guys work with social businesses like your common businesses, Bremen Bank, or that kind of Bremen Trust to get?
Well, this effort that we have, I think, is the next step that Grameen did. You know, we're really working with NGOs because we can't afford. It's interesting because this would not be an admissible project under the United Nations because how we do it is by statistical sampling. And you can't get a certified emission reduction statistically through the UN. They don't believe in statistics. I don't mean that in a pejorative way. But the way that you do airplanes or computer chips are not satisfactory process for getting projects in developing nations. You have to do it command and control. We've advocated a different approach. They're starting to come around. And so in most of these instances, it's not cost effective, but we work with socially conscious businesses and we work with NGOs to implement some of the projects that we develop in China and India. So they're key to us. And in the case of Andiodia, which is the NGO in India, we couldn't have done the project without them.
One more in the back there? Or
I think you guys ought to get a little sun while it's, have we got one more?
Now, we'll actually have a forum, if it's all right. The one thing that I'm going to not do for anyone who knows me in the room is that the notions of kind of creativity and gift giving is not my strength. I basically all kind of rely on the old faithful. I thought I was being kind of cool by saying I like Shiraz, but we should go a little closer to home than Australia to kind of minimize the footprint. But I realized I probably should have gone Australian and then offset. You know, if I was getting that. But anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Emory University.